Democracy, the path to freedom or the path to destruction. Today, I'm going to give you some arguments to demystify democracy, explain it a little bit, give some critiques, my analysis on the issues I find with democracy as a political system, a form of societal governance. I'm not going to go into too much about the alternative forms of governance, like a natural order, market order, monarchy, oligarchy, but I'm going to give you kind of the arguments, both, as you can see, the internal analytical critiques of democracy and the external or comparative political critiques of democracy, as well as I'll make a constitutional critique of democracy to rage bait the conservative constitutionalists and a empirical critique of democracy. So let's begin. What is democracy? It comes from the Greek word demos, which means the populace, the majority. So democracy is rule of the many. But is democracy better? Is it morally superior? Is it more correct? Think if we just all voted as a society to bring back slavery. It's like, should we uphold that just because we democratically elected something? Does that mean, therefore, it should be implemented? Also, historically, democracy was used to simulate who would win in a battle. You have two sides, both relatively equal in manpower, firepower, arms. So whoever had the more troops, the bigger army, would win the battle. And so that's kind of why democracy is used in this way as majority rule. That's where it comes from. But in a sense, I think this is, again, primitive. It's like what we're determining our society based off rules or like rule as far as like might makes right, which I mentioned before that, politics is about power. And then therefore this is about power, is who has the bigger army. And democracy was meant for an Athenian people. I'll come back to this third point, but I'm thinking of also the idea that democracy was not meant to elect leaders. It was meant to elect leavers. The people who are not pulling their weight in society were voted to leave. They lost out on the great society that is democracy. It was not originally intended to elect leaders. There was natural leaders in society. We didn't need to elect people as leaders. But today we have this distorted version of democracy of electing the leaders, no matter how much you may be dragging. So some further critiques. Your vote is not your voice. Your voice is your voice. I don't like this idea, this bureaucratic idea that you have to go to a voting booth in order to be heard. You should be heard like the way I'm speaking on the internet right now to people. You're hearing me. You can choose to listen to someone else, but again, then you'll be listening to someone's voice, not their vote. I think it's a very pernicious idea and propaganda to convince people that voting is their voice, because it just keeps people voting. But the market, when you go out into life, like, you should be able to use your voice every day. Yet we're kind of relegated to these like terms of 2 or 4 or 8 years in order to get our voice heard. Why not sooner? Why not then later? It's very arbitrary. But yeah, I'm also thinking of, I believe it was Chomsky who said, you want to have a wide range of discussion, but a limited range of discussion, but make it very volatile. I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But this idea that voting doesn't really change anything. Whoever you vote for, you always get the war party, because we have Trumanite institutions in a Madisonian institutional framework as far as like the executive, judicial, and legislative branches. But, it's really the NSA, CIA, Joint Chiefs of Staff who are the Trumanites, who are really running the government. That's why you always get the war party, no matter who you vote for. You don't really have an option. It's like options 2, 4, 6, and 8, or 1, 3, 5, and 7. And it's like, who was it? Jimmy Dore, who said that like the options are like, should we bomb the shit out of Libya or the fucking living shit out of Libya? It's like those are your two options in an election, which is horrible. And I have this argument further, but the idea that the option of 1 is tyranny or dictatorship, but the option of 2 is freedom, is ridiculous. You also have the myth of the rational voter by Brian Kaplan. And this is the idea that, like, everyone has an equal vote. So, like, I'm not going to do research. I'm just going to vote for whoever is more popular. Think of also a person who owns a building, employs 100, maybe 1,000 people. His vote is the same as the person on the street corner, pushing hot dogs, which, not to say anything is wrong with that, but like there's more at stake for the person who's employing and paying for the living of 100 plus people. Policies tend to influence them a lot more. And we'll get into the redistribution effects and stuff like that. But let's jump a little bit to the constitutional critique of democracy. Our Constitution, as John Adams says, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So, yeah, during the mid to late 18th century, when John Adams said that, he was saying we need a moral and religious people who can uphold our Constitution. It's inadequate for a degraded or degenerate type of people. And I think that makes a good case for towards the end of this argument on the empirical stuff. But if we look at the history of governing structures, we had aristocracies, natural aristocracies. This evolved into absolute monarchies or feudal lords in the early Middle Ages in Europe. And we had absolute monarchies, which transformed into constitutional monarchies. And this is from Professor Hans Hoppe's A Short History of Man, where he writes, constitutional monarchies were promoted by intellectuals, court intellectuals, as the result of contract. The introduction of a constitution actually formalized and codified the monarch's power to tax and legislate. And before this, the king couldn't legislate. People knew what the laws were, and if ever he tried to legislate new laws, the people would be like, "What are you talking about? No, we know what the laws are. Like, you're already taxing us." Although he had to incur these taxes via like a form of debt that he would have to pay back. But as I'll continue to read, the Constitution was not something that protected the people from the king, but it protected the king from the people. It was a state constitution which presupposed what was formerly still considered with greatest suspicion, namely the right to tax without consent and to make laws. The constitutional king, in subjecting himself to a few formalities and procedural routines, was thus enabled to expand his powers and enrich himself far beyond anything possible for him as an absolute monarch. So basically, we began this constitutional republic, the United States, with the Constitution, and we had the world's smallest government. Now we've become the world's largest government, and this is because of the Constitution. The Constitution formalized and codified not just the monarch's power with constitutional monarchies, but it's formalized and codified the states, the nation state, the democratic nation state's power to tax and legislate. They say it's right here in this Constitution that Well, it says many things in the Constitution, but the idea is that this is kind of what gives it legitimacy, the state legitimacy. There's some countries, I want to say, like Brazil, or maybe another country in South America, who they're like making a new constitution. I want to say every like 10 to 20 years. So the Constitution really doesn't protect people from the government. I mean, the Second Amendment, freedom of speech, like what is it protected? These things are under attack constantly, but it protected the king from the people. The Constitution protects the government from the people. It's like, because of the Constitution, this is like the spell that keeps, this spirit, this genie alive. So it's just a piece of paper. I didn't sign it. It shouldn't be binding on me. It should be binding on the people who signed it. Yeah, so let's think of things not so from the 18th century. And let's continue. So now let's get into some external comparative analytical critiques of democracy. So Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the most fanatic advocate of democracy, said democracy is nothing more than a moderate form of communism. He's like, it can only work within small groups of people, because in small groups of people where you know one another, your incentive to loot your neighbor is curtailed. But in this country of 350, if you want to count, the updated, undocumented immigration people, which is fine, but the more people you have, the less democracy is able to work, because I don't know the people in the town next to me. So my incentive to loot them is not so curtailed. Yeah, give me more welfare. And politicians too. I mean, this is the whole idea from Professor Friedrich Hayek of why the worst rise to the top in a democracy. It's because the role of a politician is to lie and to bribe. And so they're going to lie. They're going to say, yeah, we'll give you money if you vote for me. That's really what it is. It's all bribe for popularity. So that's how they get votes. They lie to people and bribe people. It's quite simple. And then when we look at some of the three forms of government, very briefly, as Aristotle defined it, monarchy is the rule of one, oligarchy is the rule of few, democracy is the rule of many. When it comes to analyzing ownership, and primarily we're going to be comparing monarchies to democracies, a monarch owns and retains the value of the land that he owns, so he can sell it in the market, and he can retain the value of selling his land in the market. Whereas a democratic politician borrows or rents the land and cannot retain ownership or sell the land in the market. Because a democratic politician is in there for like 4 or 8 years, and he can't pass it on to his heirs, he doesn't own it. It's like owning a car versus renting a car. How differently do you treat the car that you own versus the car that you rent for a short period of time? You're going to drive that thing in the ground. I remember when my mom got a rental car when I was in high school, I jumped it with my friends. We literally drove it like over this little bridge, and we took a video of it and posted on Vine. It blew up because it was so crazy. We literally caught air, and it was in a Chevy Spark. It sparked everywhere. It got like 30,000 views in the first day in Vine. The cops came to my house. They wanted to arrest me. But the airbags didn't go off. The bumper popped out. We pushed the bumper back in. And I don't think twice about the quality of the car. So this is the idea of the land. The land that I own, think about like who picks up the trash in a restaurant or on the land. The saying that like, who's going to pick up the trash? Who's going to clean the bathroom under communism? But they say the person who picks up the trash is the owner of like a restaurant. I don't know. It's a saying. So you have a time preference problem as well. Monarchs, because they own the land, let's say, they want to pass it on to their heirs. They have a much more longer time horizon. They see that their prospects is, 20 plus years, maybe even 100 years or 200-year time prospect on how we're going to develop and cultivate this land, how we're going to make it better. That even influences architecture. And I'll come back to this. Democratic politicians who are in office for 4, 8, 12 years have a high time preference to loot the value and capital as fast as they can, because what they can't loot now, they won't be able to loot in the future. So while they're in office, they're either spending time just trying to get reelected, or they're making friends, and this is the revolving door of the board of directors and government politicians. They make deals even with the banks, friends of the banks, contractors, and basically they're just looting the country of the taxpayers, and they don't have a higher time horizon, because what they can't get now, they won't be able to get in the future. So they're kicking the can down the road. They're acting like children, wanting to have all the fun immediately. And when you think about something like architecture or artificially lowering interest rates to make the economy appear good, but it's really just like a postponed boom period before a bust, making the bust more severe, the depressionary period. When you artificially push down these interest rates, it's basically signaling to investors, business developers, architects, builders, like, okay, there's money available. Let's take this money, and there's going to be money available tomorrow. So let's just do something quicker. It basically affects people to not look like a monarch towards the future and developing a 20, 100, 50-year long plan, but, a more immediate plan of like 1 year or 2 years or a month, a couple months, right? Or a couple years. So then you have architecture that's built in this designer chic fashion out of the Bauhaus movement, something that's bombable, something that's cheap, plywood, easy copy and paste, nothing super spiritual, nothing super La Sagrada Familia, nothing super connecting. It's all the downtowns look so similar in so many United States cities because of this corporatized, bureaucratized money and regulationary state. Furthermore, we have a responsibility problems. So monarchs are held liable for the debts they incur. So if let's say they want to go to war, they have to raise funds. They do this by raising taxes, which is like a debt. Now, if they win the war, they have to pay this debt back. If they don't, they can be overthrown, they can be beheaded, tyrannicide, regicide. With democratic politicians, they're not personally held responsible for the debts they incur, whether it be for wars, for lockdowns. So President Bush or Obama or Trump or Biden are not paying for the wars directly from their own pocket. Where's the money coming from? Well, it's coming from the American people. So they're not held personally responsible for whether it be, casualties of war from other countries or even American citizens. Think of, Oluwara Laki, I believe, is the name of an American citizen killed by Obama, not directly via his hand, but in some missile strikes and stuff like this. But there's no trial. There's no imprisonment because there's a difference with public law and private law. Private law is something that the citizens have to live by but public law is something that the states, the governments have to live by. And the whole idea of law that should be just is one that applies to everyone, not just certain people, because then this is a form of discrimination. And it's a discrimination of the taxpayers, the citizenry, versus the people who benefit from this status system, who don't have laws that apply to them. Think of like qualified immunity for police officers if they were to shoot someone's dog, or if they shoot a person. Very, very rarely do they face the same punishment as a regular citizen would. So we also have the personality problem, which is how personalities are affected under a democracy versus a monarchy. Monarchies promote value productive efforts because they're looking towards the time horizon with private ownership. Whereas, again, in a democracy, there's a form of politicization. Everything becomes politicized. That's why so many more people are discussing politics now more than ever. It's a politicization of society, which leads to more exploitation efforts as envy and egalitarian sentiments grow. This is like the idea that Mises says that the middle of the road interventionism leads step by step to socialism. So things are becoming more politicized, money's politicized, and people don't want to get left behind, so they try to become politicized as well. That's why things become less about value productive efforts and more just like, how can I get what's mine now? Because if I don't get it now, I won't be able to get it in the future. Lastly, we have some empirical critiques of democracy, and I have a basic question for you. When we analyze the United States today, compared to its inception as a constitutional republic, are we more like a socialist state or less? We just had a democratic socialist elected mayor in New York City, formerly known as the city of capitalism. We have Democrats like Bernie Sanders and others who are openly advocating for variations of socialism. We have conservatives who are like conservative socialists. They're printing a lot of money. The most money printed was under a conservative president, President Trump. So what are we conserving exactly? And to really bring this whole argument home, I mean, a democracy is majority rule. If there's 3 of us, 2 people vote to take my bike, this is a democracy. So democracy is incompatible with freedom, because if you can have your bike taken by the will of the democracy, of the demos, then you're not free. You're actually kind of subject to whatever the democracy wants, which may be your own servitude. So yeah, my argument is that democracy is incompatible with freedom. It's incompatible with capitalism. We've just really historically, the correlation has been, wow, the Industrial Revolution and democracy were born roughly in the same time period. So people think that we're wealthy because of democracy. But I argue, and inspired by Professor Hoppe, that it's in spite of democracy. And maybe if we retained a strong monarch or someone who owns the land rather than rents the land, we would be more productive. We would have more wealth. We would have more capital. But we're squandering it with this empire of spreading democracy around the world, which I will just conclude is an intellectual error. Thank you.